Hey there friend, Darren here, and what I do on this channel is help you learn, create, and share apps, and the tool of choice right now is Thunkable. And if you're like me, today I got an email that said that they just released out of beta their data viewer list and their data viewer grid. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity for me to show you just kind of the basics of how one of these new components works. And so what I'm going to do in this one is redo a video that has been popular on the channel, which was my to-do list app, which I called BrainDump. And so what we're going to do is try to recreate that to-do list using the new data viewer list component. So if you're interested, stay tuned. We're about to jump straight into it, and I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly what this looks like. So you can see right here, and I have it on my phone right here. So basically, this is the new BrainDump 2.0, and so basically it's a to-do list. So you can come and put all of your ideas in here, and I have down here at the bottom a button to add a new item. This brings you to another screen where you can add a new item, and you can save that, and that new item shows up on the list. And then we have a new feature where we can slide. So I'm just slid there to the left, and this little done thing pops up. I can press that, and that will mark that item as completed. So this is the initial release of this. The features are somewhat limited, but Thunkable does plan to make some enhancements to this. One thing in particular that I noticed is not here yet is deleting them. So I can't delete something right now. But with Thunkable, with any kind of software where someone else is making the tool and you're consuming it, you have to work within the boundaries. So we're going to do just that. So what I thought we would do is I'm going to go through and basically delete everything not pertaining to like the design, and then we're just going to recreate it. And yeah, I think it'll be really good. So let me go and delete that. We'll leave all of that. Let me delete all of these blocks here. I can right click and delete all blocks, and we'll do that here as well. And then let me open up my notes over here, and we'll get started. So I'm going to delete one more thing. Cool. All right, so basically all we have right now is some design things that I didn't want to do because they might be boring to you. Basically, on the main home screen, we have a row with two labels in it. So we have the title of the app and then a little subtitle by me, meaning I made this app. And then we have a column, which this is where our data viewer list will live. And then down at the bottom, we have another row here, you can see, with two buttons inside of it. One is eventually going to lead back to this tutorial for when people remix this app, and the other one is going to actually add the new item. So if you want to remix this app, you can just follow the link down at the bottom, and that will give you access to this app. And so that's all the design things over here. If we go over to the add screen, I have a column here with a label, or sorry, an input where they input the item, a little label telling you to put in that input name. Another thing that we might do is I have an error label listed here. So if someone tries to save something but doesn't enter in anything, then I show this little message. And then down at the bottom, we have a row again with a cancel button and a save button, which cancel your entry or save your entry. So that's about that. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing to talk about is the actual data viewer list. So we can get that by coming over to our components, typing in data, and you can see right here we have the new data viewer list. So the first thing I'll say is when you're actually looking at the list right here, the little list entries can change. So we have all these different types of kind of layouts that we can use. And a lot of these include an image. So if you wanted to use like profile pictures or icons, you could do that. We're going to go with the second one here. So we're going to have the list item over here, and then we're going to mark if the list is completed or done right here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now, these list viewers, they are supported by what is called a data source. And a data source is kind of a generic term for where your data is coming from. And so if we click right here, I need to go ahead and delete this. So I'm going to delete my original data source. Okay, so this is what you'll see if you're just getting started. We can add a new data source. And so it says, oh, you have no data sources, so I can create a new one. And then we can create a new data source from a table, from Airtable or Google Sheets. So Airtable and Google Sheets are both going to be external data sources, and we're not going to get into that in this one. What we're going to use is the simplest way to get started, which is just a new table. And so this is going to be like a stored local storage table that you might be familiar with. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and we'll give this a name of to-dos. And so now I have this new data source, and there are a few ways to edit it. I can come over here to data sources here on the right and click on it. Or once I click on the data viewer list, if I come to the properties and select it as my data source, if I come to select a table, which is going to be the first one by default, I can click here to edit the data, and that'll open up that same pop-up. And so we can rename the columns, and so I'll call this column our items, and then we'll call this item completed, because this is how we're going to know if the item is completed. And maybe we'll change these. I'll say the first one is completed, the second one is to do, they need to do it, and the third one we also need to do. And we'll leave that the same because it's just dummy data anyways. Now, for our going down here, so we've selected the data source, we've selected the table we're pulling from, we've selected our layout. The next thing we need to do is tell Thunkable which columns in our data source map to what we want to be showing here on the screen. So what do we want to show with this bold title, and what do we want to show with the subtitle? And so that's what we do right here with data bindings. What data are we binding to the different parts of the layout? So for the title, which is title, you can see title here, get title. So it says get title from, and we want to get title from the items column. And then get subtitle, well, we're going to get that from the subtitle. And so there you can see completed. And so here you can see, if I come back up here to click, you can see A, B, C, and you see over here in my app, you can see A, B, C, and then same thing with completed, to do, to do. So now we have our data viewer list hooked up to our data source, and so now we can actually start doing the kind of to-do features of it, which means adding things to it, editing those items, marking them as completed, all of that good stuff. So where do we want to get started? I think we should get started with adding a new item to the list. How does that sound? So the first thing we'll do to add a new item is we want to, whenever they click add a new item, we want to go to the add screen. So let's do that. So I'm going to come to my blocks, and in add a new, I'm going to come to the add new item button bucket. I'm going to click on that, and whenever that is clicked, I'm going to navigate to my add screen. So this is just going to bring us to this screen whenever it is clicked. So let's come over here, and on here, whenever we click the save button, we want to add whatever's in the input field to our data source that can then be displayed in the data viewer list. So let's do that. So whenever my save button is clicked, I want to update the data source. So here's another new concept. There's a new bucket called data sources here, and this is where you update a data source. These are all the functions or the methods or the things that we can use to update our data source. So the three that we'll use in this video are maybe two. The one we're going to use right now is create row. So we want to add something to the data source, so we can do that right here. So I can come and create row. All right, so let's go through each of these options and figure out what we're going to do. So it says create row in to-dos. That's our data source, and we're working in table 1. And we want the items value, so that's that first column. We want that to be whatever the user entered in our input field. And where is my, I think I labeled this wrong. This should be item input. Important to label things correctly. Item input. So the item is going to be whatever they enter in the item input. And then our completed value, whenever they create a new one, is always going to be to do, because we're going to default it to not be completed. And when that is done, we're going to navigate to the list screen. So they click save, we add it to the data source, then we come back and we should see it as a new item. So let's go ahead and test this out. Add new item. Let me enter in, here is a new item. Click done and save. And boom, here we can see a new item is now added to the list. So what do we want to do next? Next, let's do editing an item. So say I want to change the label here for A. Say I want to change it to Apple. So I want to click on this, go over to my editing screen, and from there I want to edit it and then be able to resave it. So let's go ahead and do that. So from my list screen, if I come down to data viewer list, we have 3 different events here. We have when an item is clicked, when a left swipe is clicked, and when a right swipe is clicked. So we'll get into the swipes in a little bit. Right now we want to see whenever an item is clicked. And when an item is clicked, the only thing they give us is the row ID, and then we have to do something with that row ID. So each one of these rows has a unique identifier, and it is not the if you're thinking of like an array in coding, an array is like just a list of values, and you have the value in position 0, position 1, 2. These actually have fancy IDs, so it's not 0, 1, 2, 3. Anyways, I digress. So what we want to do is take this row ID and then save that, go to the next screen, get the value in that position, update it, and then save it back to that row ID. So since we need this row ID on the other screen, we need to save it to a variable. So I'm going to come to my variables bucket and grab a variable, and we'll call this variable row ID. And we'll initially set it to not, but we will set it to null. And whenever an item is clicked, I want to update our variable row ID with the row ID of the item that is clicked. And then we're going to navigate to our add screen. And it might make sense for me to change this to like edit. So we'll call it the edit screen. And one more thing that we need to discuss. Let me grab a drink of water here. Since we are reusing a screen for 2 different purposes, we will want to know if we are adding something when we come to that screen or if we were editing something. Because whenever we come to the screen, what we're going to do is we're going to pull in something if we are editing. So since there's a condition there, we need a variable to tell us whenever we are editing. So I'm going to add a second variable, and we're just going to call this editing. And we will initially set it to false. But either way, whenever we go to the edit screen, we're going to tell the variable if we are editing or not. And what that looks like is we have a set the variable, and we're going to set the editing variable. And if add new item button is clicked, then editing should be false because we are not editing if we are adding a new item. Let me duplicate that by right clicking and pressing duplicate. And if we click on an item to edit, then we are editing, so we're going to set that to true. So this is going to help us have one screen that is dynamic whether we are adding or editing. So now whenever I click on an item, we should be brought to the editing screen. So I can see that here. And so let me come over to the blocks tab. And what I want to do is whenever the edit screen starts, we're going to check to see if we are editing. So let's do that. When edit screen starts, we're going to say if editing, then get something from our data source. So we'll come to, if we want to work with our data sources, then we need to come to the data source bucket. And here I want to get a value from our data source. And where do we want to put that? Well, we want to put that in our item input. All right, so whatever we get, we're going to put in here. All right, so going through the options, we're going to get a value from to-dos, which is our data source. We're working with table 1, and we want to get whatever the item entry is. So we're working with the items column, not the completed column. And right here it says for row ID. And so this is why I planned ahead for you. And I said we're saving that row ID in a variable, because all we have to do now is come over to our variables, and then I can drag over the get method for row ID. And so now whenever I click on something, you can see right here it's pulling in, we're saving that row ID, coming here, we are confirming that we're editing, and then we're getting the item value from to-dos with that row ID and displaying it in our text input. That's a little bit of boom sauce, like I like to call it. All right, so let's go ahead and work on saving whatever the user updates it to. So we have this save button already working, and we want to know if whenever they click save, if they're adding something, we need to create a new row in our data source. But if they're editing, we don't need to create a new row because what they're editing is already there. We just need to update it. And so if we come to data sources, we can get our update value. And since there's that condition of if we are editing or not, we'll use an if block. And so we'll say if we are editing, we want to update the value. Else, meaning we're not editing, we're going to create a new row. And I'm going to move this navigate to, and I'm not sure if you can see that, I'm moving this navigate all the way to the bottom because I want that to happen whether we update the value or the create a new row. So in either case, we want to navigate back. So let's go through the options for updating. So update value in to-dos in table 1 in items. And what are we updating? So we go to for row ID. Well, we have that already. So I'm just going to right click on row ID up here and duplicate. And what do we want to update the value to? Well, we want to update it to whatever the user has input in the text input. All right, and so now that should work. So let me go back to what we were trying to do. So I'll come to A here, click on it, and then I can update this to Apple. Click done, click save. And that'll bring me back over here, and it says Apple. Awesome. So I guess the second to last thing we're going to do, because I do have a little bit of validation I want to show you, is we want to be able to swipe to the right. Oh, and my cancel button is working either. So 3 things. Let me go ahead and add that cancel back in. So if we're on the edit screen here and cancel button is clicked, we want to navigate back to the list screen. Cancel. Awesome. All right, so 2 more things. I'm going to show you how to use the swiping feature so that you can swipe over and mark an item as completed. And then the last thing we'll go over is on the add a new item, we don't want to update anything if it is empty. So I'm going to show you how to do that validation. So the first thing is swiping. So let me come back to the list screen, and I'm going to go to the data viewer list. And if we scroll down below data bindings, we have left swipe and right swipe. So this one is a little confusing to me because left swipe means you're pulling from the right and going to the left. And right swipe means you're pulling from the left and going to the right. That's probably totally backwards on the screen there. So, boom. So we're going to use a left swipe. So whenever I turn that on, I should be able to drag this. And you can see here we have left. So let me go ahead and update some of the colors here and the text. So the text, I just used done. And the color, I changed this to this green color just to have something different to make it stand out a little bit. Cool. And so now we want to do something whenever the user clicks on this button, because right now it doesn't do anything. And so that's where those events I showed you earlier come into play. So if I come to the data viewer list bucket down here, we can use the when left swipe click event. And what do we want to do when that happens? Well, we want to we want to update the row, and we want to update that completed value. So we are going to do kind of like what we did over here. We're basically going to replicate this block right here, except for we're updating the completed column. So if we come to data sources, we can get the update value block here. And we have this handy dandy row ID that's given to us from the event. And so that's the row ID we're going to be updating. And important thing here, make sure you go through all of your properties. So to-dos in table 1, that stays the same like we've been doing. But we're updating the value in the completed column. So make sure that's that. And what are we updating the value to? Well, in this case, we're updating it to completed. So now, whenever we swipe to the left, confusing to me, whenever I click this, it should update that value. And it doesn't. So that's concerning, right? I'll ask, is this concerning? Maybe? I don't know. Interesting. Do you see what I see? So now that we came back to the screen, it looks like it's marked as completed. C is marked as completed. So basically this is something that I expect to happen whenever I update the value in my data source. I would expect it to display in the data viewer list. So I don't know what Thunkable is going to end up doing. If they're going to make it real time, where whenever you update a value in the data source, it's going to reflect. I think, let's see if this works. If I mark this as done, it's not updated. I think you can drag, and yeah, so that updates it. But the user, and I don't really know how to do that. I wouldn't know how to do that if nothing told me to do that. So what I did in this case, because I don't know, it'd be nice if there was like a refresh function or something to refresh the table or the data viewer list, but there's not that. So what I ended up doing was creating a refresh screen. So what that looks like is I created a new screen and I called it refresh. And the only thing I have on the screen is just a loading icon. And we're going to use this blue color because that's what we've been using throughout the rest of the app. And so that's all that's on the screen. And the only thing the screen does is whenever it starts, it kicks us straight back to the home screen. And so effectively what we're doing is we're going to another screen, then coming back to this screen. And what that's doing is triggering the screen to restart. And so it's then going to re-pull in all the data and all that good stuff. And so now all I need to do is whenever this update is done, after we left swipe click, is I can kick us over to the refresh screen, which then is going to kick us back, which then is going to start the screen refresh process and mark the thing as completed. So let's see that working now. So let's do that with, is this concerning? So I'll swipe left, mark done. That takes me over to the refresh screen, kicks us back, and now the item is marked as completed. So that's the workaround for now. Again, this is like the day of or the day after this component comes out. So new features are coming. So that's the workaround for now. So the last thing I promised you and last thing that I added to this app was a little bit of validation. Whenever you're working with data, whenever you're coding, you can't expect users, so users are just the people using your app, you can't expect them to always do what you want them to do. They're going to do things that are silly. So for you, it definitely makes sense to come over here and type in on the screen and then click the save button. But we'll say that, Dave. So in my local area, they make fun of a boss named Dave. So let's say that, no offense to any Daves out there. So let's say Dave comes in here and Dave just presses save. Well, then now there's a blank item in our data source. And since there's really no way to delete this, it's just a blank item. Now I can update it. So let's say update. I can update it to a new item. So that updates that. But let's keep Dave from doing that at all. And so what we're going to do is add some validation to our editing screen. And what that's going to look like is whenever we click the save button, before we do any updating or creating or saving, we want to see if the user has a value in that input box. And whenever we're checking something, we're going to use an if block. And actually, I noticed the other day, I always drag this over and pull in the else, but a little bit quicker way to do that is in our control. If we come down here to if do else, we can pull that in. And what are we checking? We want to see if the input value is empty. And so if I come to text bucket, down at the bottom, there's this, you can't see that, but down at the bottom of there, there's this little is empty check. And so it's going to check to see if our input value is empty. So I'll come to input bucket and grab the input get text. And so we'll say if it is empty, we want to see if it's not empty. So let's use our logic to say is not. So if it's not empty, then we're going to go through the process of updating or creating and then going back. If it is empty, then we're going to show that little hidden label that I showed you at the beginning of the tutorial, which is this error label that's currently not visible. So it's not visible by default, and we're going to show it. And what that looks like is down here in our else, which means it is empty, we're going to take the error label and set visible to true, and that will show that error label. And something that I added that I thought was nice was putting in a little delay. So we'll say like 3 seconds, and then we hide the error label. So we'll make that false. So that just makes it show temporarily. So let's take this update item that we just added earlier, clear out all of the text, click done, and then let's try to save it. And it says item cannot be blank. Then it goes away. And so then it tells us to try again. Item cannot be blank. And so that, my friend, is, validation 101. There might be some other things you want to check, but that's what I did. And so, yeah, that is my data viewer list tutorial number 1. So if you like this tutorial, if you like what I'm trying to do here, which is, teach you how to make apps, and, really what I value is just learning and taking what you learn and creating something with that you love, and then sharing that with others. And those are kind of the 3 things that I live by, which is, learning, creating, and sharing. That's what I do on this channel. So if you're interested in those types of, life beliefs, and you're interested in the Thunkable and creating apps, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with your friends. So I think that's where I'm going to sign off. Again, if you want to remix this app, I'll have a link below. And until next time, happy coding.